All right, so today we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff, and I think this is going to be really interesting, especially for our listeners who are into philosophy. You know how sometimes you come across those concepts in philosophy that kind of just grab you, and they're like, wait, what? They make you stop and think and really want to dig deeper.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's what we're doing today with Max Stirner,
Oh, absolutely.
a 19th century German philosopher.
Yeah.
And his ideas, they still spark debate even now, which I think says a lot.
He's definitely one of those thinkers who tends to get people fired up, you know? Like you were saying, you see his name and you're like, wait, what is this all about?
Exactly.
He gets labeled a nihilist, an egoist, all these big terms get thrown around.
Those are some pretty loaded terms,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's what we want to unpack today.
Exactly, because it's like trying to sum up a whole symphony in just one note. You're going to miss a lot of the nuances.
Exactly. So before we get into the really complex stuff, let's just set the stage a bit. Picture Germany in the 1840s. It was a time of huge intellectual change.
Oh, yeah, a real cauldron of ideas bubbling away.
Philosophers were wrestling with ideas about individual freedom, the role of religion, and all these new ideologies popping up.
Right, and smack dab in the middle of all that, Stirner publishes his most influential work,
Which is?
The Ego in Its Own, in 1844.
Okay, the ego and its own.
And let me tell you, that book hit the intellectual scene like a philosophical bombshell.
It's kind of funny, I was reading that he basically dropped this intellectual grenade and then stepped back to watch everything explode.
He did. He pretty much retreated from public life after the book came out, but his ideas, they didn't just disappear.
No, they really stuck around.
They kept popping up in different movements, both intellectual and political, which is kind of wild when you think about it. A work that seemed to fade away for a bit ended up having this huge, lasting impact.
It really speaks to how powerful his ideas were. Like they were challenging something fundamental, so they keep coming back up.
Absolutely challenging the core of how we think.
Okay, so let's dig into the ego in its own a bit.
Hmm.
And, for our listener who's already into philosophy, I think one of the first things that strikes you about this book is the writing style.
Oh, yeah, completely. It's not your typical philosophy book, all dry and systematic.
No, not at all.
It's like Stirner's playing with words, throwing out aphorisms, those short, punchy statements. And there's this kind of playful, almost combative tone.
It's like he's saying, hey, wake up, pay attention.
Exactly. And that style, it's not just for show. It's connected to the core of his philosophy.
And it's not just a stylistic quirk.
No way. He sees language as this powerful tool, something that can either free us or trap us. And by using language in this unconventional way, he's trying to shake us loose from what he sees as rigid thinking.
Okay, I love that, Aunt. He's like a philosophical jujitsu master, using the opponent's own weight against them.
Laughs. That's a great way to put it.
And that really subversive approach, you see it especially in his critique of what he calls religious modes of thought. And that's really at the heart of everything he's doing.
It is. It's the foundation. Now, when he talks about religious thought, he's not just talking about traditional religion, like going to church or temple. He means it in a much broader sense.
Okay, so what does he mean by religious thought?
Any system of thought, any system at all, that puts an ideal or a concept above the individual.
So anything that becomes like a dogma, like a set-in-stone truth that can't be questioned.
Exactly. Whether it's traditional religion or political ideologies or moral systems, even those feel-good values we hold dear, like love, justice, reason.
He's saying even those can become problems.
If they're put on this pedestal, this untouchable level, they can become tools of oppression. They become what he calls spooks, these phantom ideas that control our minds.
So he's saying that even good things can turn bad if we're not careful, if they start to limit our individual freedom.
Precisely. They become these chains, these invisible chains that hold us back.
I see. And this whole idea of spooks, this is what leads him to criticize some of the big thinkers of his time, right? Like Ludwig Feuerbach, who was a huge name in German philosophy. I mean, this guy was known for his critique of religion. He said that God was basically just a projection of human qualities.
Right, he was saying we created God in our own image. But here comes Stirner, and he's not buying it.
So even though Feuerbach was trying to free people from religion, Stirner saw a problem.
He did. He argued that Feuerbach just replaced God with another spook.
With what?
The abstract concept of man, humanity with a capital H.
And that's still a problem for Stirner.
Absolutely, because it's still this big overarching idea that ends up dominating the individual. It's like you're trading one master for another.
Okay, so even though the new master might sound better, Stirner's saying it's still a master. It's like trading one set of chains for another, even if the new chains are shiny gold.
Laughs. Perfect analogy. And this critique of Feuerbach, it's crucial for understanding what Stirner means by egoism.
Okay, here's where things get really interesting, especially for anyone coming at this from a philosophical point of view.
Right, because egoism gets a bad rap.
It does. When you hear egoism, you think selfish, narcissistic, only caring about yourself. But Stirner's talking about something much deeper than that, right?
Way deeper. For him, egoism isn't about being a jerk or indulging in whatever you want. It's about radical self-ownership. It's about the individual, what he calls the unique one. Recognizing their own uniqueness and refusing to be controlled by anything outside themselves.
So it's not about rejecting all relationships and living like a hermit.
No, it's about realizing you have the power to choose how you engage with the world, how you engage with other people. It's about recognizing that you are the ultimate authority in your own life. You define your own values, you make your own choices.
You're not just going along with what everyone else tells you to do.
Yeah.
You're the captain of your own ship.
Exactly. And this idea of self-ownership, it's the foundation for everything else in Stirner's philosophy. His views on the state, morality, relationships, it all comes back to this.
He's clearing the ground, getting rid of all the pre-existing structures,
Yeah.
and saying, okay, let's start fresh. Let's build something new based on individual freedom.
Exactly.
It's a pretty radical way of looking at things.
And that's where things can get kind of tricky, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're throwing out all these external sources of authority, like, okay, what's left? Then what guides you? Like, how do you make decisions? What's to stop you from just, doing whatever you want, even if it hurts other people?
That's the question that always comes up with Stirner, right? It's like,
Yeah.
okay, self-ownership sounds good in theory, but how does it actually work in the real world where we're all like bumping up against each other all the time?
Right. Does it just lead to total chaos and everyone out for themselves?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's where Stirner introduces this concept of ownness. And remember, he's not saying egoism is just being selfish or chasing pleasure all the time. It's more about self-mastery. It's about understanding your own desires and drives and acting in line with those, but also not being a slave to them.
So it's not just like giving in to every impulse that comes along.
No, it's more like you're the architect of your own life. You're making conscious choices. You're not just being swept along by whatever comes your way.
So you're shaping your life instead of letting it shape you.
Exactly. You're recognizing that you have the power to choose how you interact with the world and with other people. And that includes the freedom to use things and people for your own benefit.
Okay, now I know that word use can sound kind of harsh, especially when we're talking about relationship.
Right. It's not about treating people like objects or manipulating them.
So what's he getting at then?
It's more about recognizing that relationships are based on mutual benefit. You choose to be in relationships with people because you get something valuable out of it, right?
Okay, so even in the best relationships, there's some element of self-interest.
Yeah, and Stirner says being honest about that self-interest can actually lead to more genuine relationships because you're not pretending to be motivated by some kind of moral duty.
You're saying, I'm here because I want to be here because this relationship brings something to my life.
Exactly. It's about being real about what motivates us, and this idea of individual choice and self-determination. It goes beyond just relationships. It also applies to how Stirner views the state.
Okay, so how does egoism fit in with his political views?
Well, for Stirner, the state is like the ultimate embodiment of external authority, right? It tells you what to do. It imposes its will on you, whether you like it or not.
So you can see how that clashes with his whole philosophy of egoism, which is all about individual sovereignty.
Big time. And because Stirner puts so much emphasis on individual autonomy, he sees the state as illegitimate, period. He doesn't care what form of government it is. He rejects the whole idea of political obligation.
Wow, so he's not just saying, we need a smaller government. He's basically saying, get rid of government entirely.
Yeah, pretty much. He sees the state as unnecessary and ultimately harmful because it infringes on individual freedom.
That's a radical stance for sure.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions, but at its core, it reflects Stirner's commitment to individual freedom and his skepticism towards any kind of power that claims authority over the individual.
And that skepticism, it even extends to something as basic as promises.
You got it. For Stirner, a promise is a way of limiting your future freedom. It's like saying, future me, you have to do what present me decided. And for Stirner, that goes against the whole idea of self-ownership.
So you shouldn't make promises.
He would say that the egoist should be willing to break a promise if it no longer serves their interests or if they simply change their mind. It's about staying open to new possibilities and not letting past decisions control your present actions.
This whole idea of constantly reevaluating your commitments and being willing to break free from anything that's not working for you. It's both exciting and scary. At the same time, it's like living in this constant state of flux.
I know, right? It gets to the heart of what makes Stirner so challenging. He makes you confront the implications of taking individual freedom to its absolute limit.
It's like he's asking, what happens to morality, to relationships, to society itself when people prioritize their own interests above everything else?
Yeah, and even if you agree with his critique of existing systems, it's hard to imagine how a society of completely autonomous individuals would actually work. Wouldn't it just fall apart?
Wouldn't it just be chaos?
That's a common criticism, and it's one that Stirner tries to address with his concept of the union of egoists.
Okay, so what's the union of egoists? Is that like his blueprint for a new society?
Not exactly. It's more of a framework for thinking about how voluntary cooperation could work between self-interested individuals. He's not laying out a detailed plan.
So it's more of a general idea, a way of imagining a different way of relating to each other.
Right, think of it like a network of free associations where individuals come together for specific reasons and then go their separate ways when they're done.
So it's not about creating a new government or anything like that.
No, it's much more fluid and dynamic than that.
It's like a marketplace of relationships where people are constantly negotiating the terms of their interactions based on their own needs and desires.
That's a great way to put it. And for Stirner, this kind of voluntary cooperation is more likely to be genuine and sustainable than relationships based on obligation or force.
Okay, I get that.
Right.
But how would this union of egoists deal with things like conflict or the need to work together to solve problems that affect everyone?
That's where things get even more complicated,
Mm.
and where Stirner's ideas are open to a lot of interpretation. He doesn't give us a ton of concrete answers, but I think he would say that in a truly egoistic society, individuals would find ways to resolve conflict and cooperate without needing a central authority like the state.
So it's about trusting that people will figure things out on their own, even if it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's a very different way of thinking about social order, and it's definitely not without its challenges.
But he's saying the potential rewards of a world where people are truly free to be themselves are worth the risk.
That's the core of his argument for sure. And what do you think so far, all this Stirner stuff?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, that's for sure. I think what really stands out for me is how Stirner makes us question things we usually take for granted. Like, we just accept ideas about morality or the state as if they're just natural facts. But Stirner comes along and says, "Hey, wait a minute, let's look at the foundation of all this."
It's like he's pulling back the curtain, showing us all the hidden machinery that we usually don't even notice. And it can be kind of unsettling, you know? Like, whoa, what if all this stuff I thought was true is actually just made up? Exactly. And that's the tricky part about Stirner. On one hand, it's exciting to throw out all the rules and say, I'm in charge of my own life. But then it's like, okay, but what are the rules now? What happens next?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of rebellion, but then you have to figure out what you're going to build in its place.
Yeah.
So if we're not following traditional morality or societal expectations, what's stopping everyone from just going wild? I mean, isn't that what people worry about with Stirner?
It's a natural concern for sure, and it's something Stirner addresses. Remember, he's not saying egoism is about being hedonistic or just doing whatever feels good in the moment. It's about self-mastery. It's about being aware of your desires and acting in a way that's truly in your best interest.
Okay, but even if we assume everyone is acting in their own best interest, what happens when those interests clash? Like, my best interest might be the opposite of yours. How do we resolve that without some kind of outside authority to step in?
That's where the union of egoists comes in. But remember, it's not like some utopia he's mapped out in detail. It's more like a thought experiment, a way to explore how people could cooperate without giving up their individuality.
So he doesn't have a rule book for this union. No constitution, no laws.
No, it's more organic than that. He thinks cooperation would naturally happen because people are self-interested.
Yeah.
It's like, think about a market. People trade because it benefits both sides.
Okay, so the union of egoists is more like this constantly shifting network of relationships. People come together because it works for them, and then they move on when it doesn't.
Right. It's all about voluntary association. No one's forcing anyone to do anything. And Stirner believes that this kind of system is actually more stable and fulfilling than one based on force or obligation.
It's a pretty different way of thinking about how society works.
Mm.
Okay, but how would this actually play out in real life? Like, what about things like education or healthcare? Would those be left entirely up to each person to figure out?
That's a great question. And honestly, I don't think Stirner gives us a clear-cut answer. But I think he'd argue that in a society of truly autonomous individuals, people would find ways to cooperate and provide for those needs without needing the state or other big institutions to do it for them.
So it's almost like flipping the script. Instead of having this top-down structure where authority tells people what to do, Stirner starts with the individual and says, how can we build a world where everyone is free to pursue their own goals without stepping on each other's toes?
It's a huge shift in thinking. And yeah, people who are used to the way things are now might be skeptical. But Stirner would say that we need to question everything if we want to break free from the limitations of the systems we're living in.
Okay, so let's say, just for fun, that we could actually create a society like Stirner's Union of Egoists. Would it be amazing? Would it be a disaster?
Yeah.
What are the potential upsides and downsides of this whole radical individualism thing?
Well, like any thought experiment, there are pros and cons. Think about the good stuff first. A Stirnerian society could be incredibly creative, full of innovation, because everyone's free to explore their own passions without all the usual restrictions.
It'd be a world of self-made people, everyone contributing their own unique skills and ideas.
And since cooperation would be based on mutual benefit, relationships could be much more genuine.
No more feeling obligated to do things you don't want to do. You're with people because you genuinely want to be.
Exactly. But, on the other hand, there are definitely some potential problems too. One big worry is that a society of individualists might have trouble dealing with issues that require everyone to work together.
Like, what about climate change? It's hard to imagine a group of people who are all about their own interests coming together to make sacrifices for the greater good.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Critics of Stirner say that his philosophy is too idealistic, that it doesn't take into account the messy reality of human nature and the need for some level of social unity.
So it seems like Stirner's ideas leave us with this big question mark. His focus on individual freedom is really attractive. It speaks to this deep human desire to be in control of our own lives. But then his rejection of traditional systems and his belief that self-interest can be a good thing can also feel kind of scary. Like, what if it all goes wrong?
That tension, that back and forth, is what makes Stirner so interesting. He forces us to grapple with some really fundamental questions about what it means to be free, what the limits of individualism are, and whether it's even possible to create a society where individual freedom and collective well-being can coexist.
And even if we don't agree with everything he says, I think there's a lot we can learn from Stirner. He makes us think critically about the things we usually take for granted, the authority structures that shape our lives, and what it really means to be free.
He's like that friend who always asks the tough questions, the ones that make you uncomfortable but also make you think in new ways.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Max Stirner, I'm left with one final thought-provoking question for you, dear listener. If, as Stirner suggests, all systems of thought are ultimately spooks, these abstract phantoms that limit our freedom, then what really guides our actions and choices in a world without fixed values or moral absolutes? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, and it's one that each of us has to wrestle with on our own. But maybe the very act of asking the question is a step towards freeing ourselves from those spooks and creating a world where we can truly be ourselves. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the mind of Max Stirner. We hope it was enlightening, challenging, and maybe even a little bit subversive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.